So one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and this was an amazing start. That was just after the first question, but um, what do you think is one of the biggest issues of the left that we face? And by the left, I'm talking about the Western left, because the left as far as South America, the left as far as in Asia, even the left in African nations, more they seem to have more solidarity with each other. They seem to be more, um, I don't want to say homogeneous, but they seem to be more, just have a more togetherness as far as the direction that they go. What is one of the things that you think is the biggest issues, and how do you think that we can solve it?
That's a brilliant question, because we look around and there's something wrong, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we in '91 when the Soviet Union fell, the American left went away. I still remember my mom crying as she heard about the Berlin Wall falling. That's
Oh
like
my
very, very
gosh.
vivid in my memory. And she was saying, "This is the end. This is it. It's over." And people gave up. The proletariat that was radical, what was left of it at that time, gave up. And
Wow.
it's sad, right? We went into full retreat. Our Communist Party fell apart. It split for the first time in history. All of the motion that was started during the civil rights movement was petering out, but capitalism moves on regardless, right? I think the real
Mhm.
problem is that between then and now, the left became a middle class thing. It was middle class people who had the time to organize and did it for a moralistic reason. They saw injustice and wanted to fight it. And that's fine. But what that does is it brings with it a middle class social consciousness, which is very
Mm,
individualistic, very at the institute we call this the purity fetish. It manifests itself
got it.
most fully within the middle class in that if something isn't up to their subjective level of purity, they condemn it wholesale. And this is also based on the distortions that had a chance to arise in that period, making a whole generation of people who look to the left and see things calling itself Marxist, communist, socialist, etc., but not being actually that, being distortions, a lot of times outright lies that has its roots in the CIA. Um, Things like the Congress for Cultural Freedom and a lot of other CIA programs were created to start a fake left, right? A left that would be compatible with bourgeois society and never be able to overthrow it. And it, by definition, then has to take on two main issues: the Black Liberation Movement, or three main issues: Black Liberation Movement, Communist Movement, Peace Movement. And they did that. However, capitalism continues going, right? The middle class is being destroyed as we speak. Reproletarianization is happening, and it's pushing all these new people into action. And so, as they're coming into this, they bring with them the middle class social consciousness that they're from. Their parents had okay lives in the suburbs, a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
They don't, though. They're denied this. And so
Yeah.
they come into the left and are immediately greeted with that same middle class culture that arose in that last period. And so for me, the major issue is overcoming that and refocusing on class struggle and putting the working class in the front of the sort of movement as it forms, reorganizing all of our institutions, rebuilding them, and sort of subsuming that middle class atmosphere to a more proletarian one where
Got it.
things aren't pure, one where
Mm,
we don't base things on subjective morality. Everyone's vulgar. People like you and I can sit here and talk, and it's fine without sort of the cancel culture, etc. And the other prong of this is getting over bourgeois theories. The bourgeois left is huge in our era. The bourgeois academy, and Lenin teaches us this, serves the bourgeois class, right?
Got it.
So getting rid of their theories as they come to us through that middle class and getting back to Marxism through education is mandatory in doing this.
So, from what you have just explained, this sounds indicative of some of the loudest voices within independent left media. Because one of the biggest gripes that I've had, and a lot of people, especially at RBN, at Indie News Network, many people from MCSC, and many others, is that there's a lack of a sense of urgency. And I guess you can kind of use bourgeois and professional managerial class kind of interchangeably, I guess.
Yeah, they're sort of the last part of the middle classes.
Yeah. So these classes are more hyper-focused on identity, left identity, and they kind of take a back seat when it comes to left economics, or they will declare fealty to left economics, but when it's failed among the political class, then it's, oh, we just got to try harder. When those of us who are more proletariat minded or labor worker minded, we go, yeah, it hasn't worked for 40 years. We're going to go into a new direction. But then you'll have some that will say, you guys need to grow up. And then this is when we go, but it hasn't worked for 40 years. What do you expect us to do? Wait another 40 years? And and by that time I'll be in my 70s, and I won't have Social Security to keep me afloat anymore. I mean, it's barely keeping me afloat now.
None of us will have retirement, right?
Yeah.
Our kids, it's like, I have a 13-year-old son. I am very worried about his ability to take care of his own family when he gets older. And I think you're spot on when you say they're hyper-focused on identity. And this comes from the middle class social consciousness, right? They don't have a real class struggle. They're okay. They've never had to worry about paying the rent, right?
Yeah.
They've never had to worry about, when I get old, what's going to happen to me, right? They've never had to, decide which sibling has the mom or dad move in with them when they get old, because there is no retirement. They have none of these issues. And so they focus on identity, and the vast majority of them will cling to a sort of oppressed minority, even when they're not from this community, and act as if they speak for that entire community, right? When we have someone who makes $300,000 a year saying they speak for, say, the gay working class or the black working class or whatever it is, they're operating outside the realm of reality. They don't experience society the way the working class members of this community do.
Yeah.
What it does, real quick, I'm sorry, I forgot. What it does is they sort of isolate over and over and over and over and over again. And you don't think of yourself first as a working class person or an American or whatever. You must think of yourself as the happenstance of birth. So I am a Jewish, white, cishet, male working class person. And each of these things must be at odds with the identity issues of others. And this is where the sort of bourgeois theory and ideology comes in. It sets us up, because it removes class, to act as if there are components of each of these that are contradictory with components of the others. So let's say I am a gay Black woman, right? I am an antagonistic contradiction with a straight Black man or a straight white man. But that's not the case, right? There's no materiality behind that. While there are differences and there are some contradictions, they are not essential to what we are. And that's what's really important. What we are shares a commonality in what built us and the relations of production that create how we think, how we respond to challenges, what challenges we have. That is how everything we become is formed, right? And so this is the basis of what we call proletarian internationalism. And we could call it, the anti-racist struggle or the anti-homophobia struggle or whatever it is in the American context rather than the global context. All of it has an essentiality in potential for solidarity rather than what they tell us, which is that there's no potential for solidarity and these others are nothing like you and you should be enemies.
Well, I mean, that kind of speaks to something I've said for quite, some time now, is that when people embrace maybe transphobic, homophobic, racist, xenophobic, or misogynistic type of ideologies, really they're fighting against their own class for and on behalf of maybe the bourgeois, but most likely the oligarchs of this country. And so really if you're expressing racist, homophobic, misogynistic, or any one of these other types of ideologies, really you're working against yourself.
100%.
So if you're one of those people who talks about black on black crime, it's like no, you're working against yourself. Or if you're talking about, oh man, these drag queens are reading to kids, I'm like, you're literally working against yourself right now, because you're focusing on the identity and you're letting or allowing the oppressors who have all the power running out the back door with all the money. And it's like, no, you need to realize and recognize your humanity and how you are so much more closer to that person who puts on a lace front wig and contours that reads to sheltered dogs than you do to somebody like a Jeff Bezos. Because guess what? That person is a proletarian. They're working for a living just like you. So guess what? You need to throw that shit out of the window and start coming, in coalition with that person in order to overthrow these people who actually are dominating over us.
It reminds me of what Du Bois was talking about the Civil War soldiers.
Yeah.
Right. And Engels talks about this quite a lot, that the proletariat, so you can't just tell the working class the correct thing. It must experience it in order to learn it. Right. And Gus Hall has a really good quote about this in a book he wrote called, oh God, I forget. But the name of the essay is The Crisis of Petty Bourgeois Radicalism. And actually one of the theoretical projects I'm working on is expanding this into middle-class American radicalism of today. And he says in this, people do not respond to commands or exhortations. They do not respond to ideas, even good ideas, unless they see their self-interest reflected in those ideas, right? So in working with these people who may have previously held some homophobic or whatever it is, ideas that they just sort of grew up with or whatever, that is how they learn they were wrong. And so for me, I try to focus less on what they can do and more on what I can do to make us more appealing than whatever misled them in the first place. And that's a really hard thing to do these days. It takes a lot of humility. I swallow my pride quite a bit when I'm talking to people, but it works. I'm a carpenter. I work in the finishing trades. So I'm around building trades and finishing trades guys all day. And they say some of the zaniest shit that, I'm sorry to swear, that you could imagine, right? Just xenophobia left and right. All these Mexicans are taking our jobs type of stuff. But in explaining to them and talking to them, I can show them that, look, that's not the case, right? What's really going to make it happen overall is working right side by side, though, And so being able to bring people in and show rather than tell, I think, is important.
Yeah. This is just like with Bobby Lee of the Black Panthers. He had a bunch of white people saying they're shooting you just like they're shooting us. So what are we going to do about it? And so it was really, your life is being taken away by these same forces that are protecting capital, just like it's taking our lives away. And sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'll just cut in real quick. Here's something that the media never talks about. And you hear a lot because of all the work of the civil rights movement that Black people are killed by police at staggeringly higher rates than anyone else, right? And there's a historical reason for that based in white supremacy. At the same time, more white people overall are killed than anyone else by police. What that is a chance for solidarity. But white people don't hear that, right? They don't see this sort of commonality we have, that the state's against all of us. And a coworker who actually began a very reactionary said to me the other day, he said, they're killing all of us now, aren't they? And I'm like, yeah, that sort of solidarity against the ruling class thing is beginning to make sense, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a sad fact of reality that it takes experience, that people can't just learn this through talking a lot of the times. But it's happening, and I think that gives me hope, and it inspires me at any rate.
Yeah, I said this before, and I'll say it again. I said Black people are the canary in the coal mine. If they had us in chattel slavery and they're perpetually putting us back into it, what makes you think they're not going to do it to everybody else?
Precisely.
Because guess what? White people are over 60% of the population. That's 60% of a workforce that they could enslave into chattel and create a lot more products out of and extract resources out of. And they're doing it now, but it's not as extreme as the chattel slavery in the past, but they're working towards it. And people look at me like I'm crazy by saying that the fulfillment of capitalism is slavery. And so when I say that, I mean not just chattel slavery for people who look like me, but for everybody across the spectrum, because we are just the trial period. People that look like me. Now it's going to be the rest. And I liken it like this. And people, this is a good thought experiment. When the George Floyd protests were happening, a lot of white people actually saw what we meant. Because when they went up against the police force and they got their heads bashed in by police out there, then that's when they started to see, oh, this is what Black people have been saying for years. Now I get it. I have the bump on my head to prove it. The problem is we didn't want you to have to bump your head in order to learn. But unfortunately, some people are now learning that. And even Savvy and me talked about last week how Whoopi Goldberg on The View said, are white people going to have to lose their lives to police in order for us to change? And it pains me. I'm just like, I think that's what it may take. And I don't want it to happen. But if it does, then
it's incredibly sad. Things don't change because we have good ideas, right? Things don't change even because people are oppressed. If that were the case, slavery wouldn't have lasted a week, right? Feudalism wouldn't have lasted a month.
Yeah.
What changes things is the old system being unable to continue on. And I think reproletarianization is a sign that it's no longer able to carry on. And all of
Yeah.
these other things are symptoms of this happening. A lot of people call it neocolonialism, right? Sort of finance capital expanding over the globe, globalization, etc., and holding other countries in perpetual states of underdevelopment is becoming more and more impossible, right? We have the rise of communist China, Russia, all of these independent nations outside of the empire are shrinking that sort of imperial holdings. And it's creating all of these repercussions here and deteriorating things here as well. And so this is a time for, I mean, it's what creates us, but it's also time for us to step up and fulfill the historical role that Karl Marx discovered the proletariat holds over 200 years ago.
Yeah. So, in your mind, what does that look like? Because right now, there's a teaching phase, right? You have the Midwestern Marx Institute, RBN, where we're trying to teach through our experience as Black workers and Black poor people, and we're trying to, push people into not only leaving the two parties, but also pushing people to recognize that they have power and to wield that power as a proletariat, because we really need a dictatorship of the proletariat. So, what does this look like? I think I kind of answered my question, but if you want to expound on it a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. The beginning of it looks like this, right? Like exactly what we're doing right now. On the 24th, I'm going to Philadelphia. I'm going to I'm going to give a talk on a panel at the W.E.B. Du Bois Symposium, hosted by the Saturday Free School for Black Liberation and Socialism. It's going to be these things creating a network of us. And I think there's a lot we can learn from the Bolivarian Revolution on modern day revolutionary organizing. Back in the day, you formed a communist party and you went and, took over the Winter Palace. Things don't happen like that no more, they just don't. And so it's going to take a network of all of our class struggles in forming a concrete organization that can give direction to action, that can coordinate and strategize and carry out tactical moments and actions itself.